Yesterday we were discussing some of the concepts of exception handling. Okay, we have seen about checked exceptions. Okay, and in checked exceptions, like the checked exceptions are recognized by the compiler. Some of the checked exceptions are class not found exception, instantiation exception, illegal access exception, IO exception, SQL exceptions. All those are checked exceptions. And the class dot for name is a checked exception which may be raised by invocation of class dot for name, which is used to create the object. Class dot for name dot new instance will create the object and it will be typecast into our type. Okay, so it will raise a checked exception. The for name invocation will raise a checked exception, class dot found exception. Okay, if there is a chance for raising a checked exception, definitely the compiler will recognize that, and if we don't handle the exception, the compiler will give you an error that okay, the exception should be handled. So the information of checked exceptions will be there at the compiler. So the compiler will give a compile time error if the checked exception is not handled. And there is a catch with checked exception, definitely there should be a corresponding exception rising statement in the try. Okay, that's what we have discussed yesterday. And today we discussed about the third block in the exception handling mechanism, that is finally. See, this for name, what it will do means it will prepare the class to create the object. The new instance method will create the actual object. Now, let me don't go for this new instance. Okay, so if I don't go for new instance, then also it will give a compile time error, just because we have instantiation and exception in illegal access exception, which will be raised, okay, only when if we call new instance. So these two are checked exceptions, but the corresponding exception rising statement is not there in the try. Okay, because of new instance, there are two checked exceptions. One is instantiation and one is illegal access. So these are for new instance. So if this new instance is not executed, now what happens means there are two checked exception catches, but the corresponding exception rising statement is not there in the try. Now will it give a compile time error? Yes, just because instantiation exception is a checked exception as well as illegal access exception is a checked exception, but the corresponding exception rising statement is not there in the try. Okay, now if I try to compile this, see, just this new instance will create the object, but class dot for name will never create the object. Just prepare to create the object. So now catch with instantiation exception and catch with illegal access exception are there, but there is no corresponding exception rising statement in the try. Class dot for name will not create the object, just it will prepare the class in the string to create the object. Okay, so let me remove this. Now it will compile, just because for name will raise a checked exception, class dot found exception. Okay, and it is being handled. So checked exceptions will make a problem in either way. If there is a checked exception in the try and if it is not handled, then also it is a compile time error. If there is a catch with checked exception and if there is no corresponding exception arising statement, then also it will be a compile time error. So we should be careful with checked exceptions. Now the next thing is the usage of the third block in the exception handling. Finally, there are three executable blocks in the exception handling. One is try, a catch, and finally. Let's consider that I have inside try, now is there any compile time error here? Is there any compile time error here? Is there any compile time error here in this application? Yes or no? Yes? What is the compile time error? Class not found exception? Is not raised in try block. Why it should be raised in try block? Just because class not found exception is a checked exception. Since class not found exception is a checked exception, the corresponding exception rising statement is expected in the try, but doesn't exist. Class dot for name in the try doesn't exist. If there is a catch with checked exception, then it is expected that the exception rising statement will be there in the try. The class dot per name should be there in the try, but it's not there, so it will give a compile time error. If there is a catch with checked exception, definitely there should be corresponding exception arising statement in the try. Otherwise, it will be a compile time error. For class not found exception, it's class dot per name, but the class dot per name doesn't exist in the try, so it is a compile time error. So, if there is a checked exception, definitely there should be some statement which may raise a checked exception, whatever the checked exception might be. Now, is it a rule for unchecked exception? No, it's not a rule for unchecked exception. The rule that I have told now is just for checked exceptions. Now, what happens? Now, is there any exception? Let's consider that. Let's consider the first example. Now, is there any exception in the try? Yes or no? No. There is? Is there any exception in the try? No, there is no exception. So, the first case is there is no exception. Now it was compiled successful. Let me go to the classes. Let me execute the application. Before inside try, finally end. Now is the catch block executed when there is no exception in the try? No, the catch block is not executed, but finally is executed. So finally will be executed when there is no exception. That's the first case. It's not the only case, that's one of the cases. Okay? Just we'll see the next case. Now what happens? What happens? Is the exception raised? Is the exception raised? Yes. Now, is the raised exception handled? No. Exception is raised, but it was not handled. Now, it will block the process of execution, right? Am I right? The exception is raised, but it was not handled. Now, it will block the process of execution. But before blocking the process of execution, what it is doing? It's executing the finally block. Now, can we tell that finally block is executed if the exception is raised and it was not handled? Yes. Now, let's handle the exception. Now, what happens? Is the exception raised? Is the exception raised? Yes. Now, was it handled? Was the raised exception handled? Yes. Here there is exception, str value is null and we are accessing length, so it is a null pointer exception. Now, do we have a catch with null pointer exception? Yes. So the exception will be handled. Now the exception is raised and handled. Now let us see in this case. Is the final block executed? Is the final block executed? Yes. Now, when the final block is executed means whether there is exception is raised or not. Whether exception is raised or not, or the raised exception is handled or not. Whether the exception is raised or not, or the raised exception is handled or not. Whether the exception is raised or not, or the raised exception is handled or not. In all the cases, finally block will be executed. Whether the exception is raised or not, or the raised exception is handled or not. In all the cases, finally block will be executed. In all the cases, finally block will be executed. So, why this finally block is used means Okay, let's consider we have some resources. Okay, let's consider that we have some resources like file system or database connection which we open in the try block or which we open before the try block. Let's consider that there is an exception in the try block. Let's consider that if we close the resources at the last statement of the try block, if we close the resources, let's consider like we are opening the resources before try. Let's consider like it is a file system and we are opening the file system and we are reading some data from the file system, and at the last statement of the try we are closing the file system. Then what happens? The file will be closed only if there is successful execution. Let's consider like in the middle if there is any exception. Let's consider like at this line there is an exception. Let's consider if there is an exception in the middle. Now is the file closed? No. So let's consider like for a day 100 such events happen. So 100 files will be permanently open even if we are not using that. Is it the correct thing? No. So if the exception is raised, okay, and it was handled or not, then we should close that file. Even if the exception is not raised, then also we should close the file. Understood? If it is successful execution, then we close the file. Or let's consider like the execution is failed. There is an exception. Let's consider like there is an exception, it was not handled. Then also we should close the file. Let's consider like if there is an exception and it got handled, then also we should close the file. Now, where we can close the file? Where it is ideal to close the file? See, now I need to close the file on successful execution, or when exception is raised and it was handled, or when exception is raised and it was not handled. Now, where is the correct place? Where is the ideal where is the ideal place to close the file? Definitely the finally. Definitely finally. Okay? So the ideal place or the ideal block where we need to keep the shutdown kind of activities. These closing activities are called as shutdown activities. And to write the shutdown activities, we have finally block. All these closing activities are called as shutdown activities. And to perform the shutdown activities, we write the corresponding statements in the finally block. To perform the shutdown activities, we write the corresponding logic in the finally block. Understood? Now, if you want to perform some shutdown activities, then we write the code related to the shutdown activity in the finally block. Just because the finally will be executed, whether there is an exception or not, or the raised exception is handled or not. Now, if I write that shutdown activity here, if I write the shutdown logic here, will it work in all the cases? If I write the shutdown logic here after finally, then will it work for all the cases? Will it work for all the cases mentioned above? Just I have mentioned some cases previously. Exception is raised or not, or the raised exception is handled or not. Now, for all the cases, let's consider, like if I write the shutdown logic here after the exception handling mechanism, then will it work? No. No, that's what I was saying. Will it work for all the cases? No. Why? In which case it will fail? In which case the 20-second statement will not be executed? If the exception is raised, but it was not handled. If the exception is raised and it was not handled, will it come to the 20-second statement? No. So, in that case, this will not be afforded. So, in any case, whether the exception is raised or not, the raised exception is handled or not. If the exception is not raised, definitely it will come to 20-second statement. If the exception is raised and handled, definitely it will come to 20-second statement. But if the exception is raised, but it was not handled, then will it come to 20-second statement? No. Let's consider like there is an exception here. Then at the 10th line itself, the execution will be blocked. Control will not come to 20-second statement. So there is an exception and it was not handled. What happens? Definitely the file will be still open. Shutdown will not be done. So if you want to execute some mandatory logic, whether the exception is raised or not, or the raised exception is handled or not, we write that logic in the finally block. In general, the shutdown activities will be there in the finally block. Closing the file system, closing the connections, like that. Okay. Now, the finally block will be executed in all the cases, whether the exception is raised or not, or the raised exception is handled or not. Now, if I put try finally catch, then it will be compile the method. The order should be maintained. Try, there is a catch, then finally. Okay. Now, this will give a compile error just because before catch it is finally, but it should be order. Try, catch, and finally. So try should be followed by catch, and catch should be followed by finally. Now, can we compile try catch without finally? Can we compile try catch? Can we have a try catch without finally? Yes, we can have a try catch without finally. There can be a try catch without finally. It's possible. So now what is the output in this case? Before? Inside try? Before? Catch one? Finally? End. Before? It will come here, str value is null, so it is a null pointer exception, so it will come to this catch one, finally end. In any case, finally will be executed. So before catch one, finally end. Okay, that's the output. Now, what happens? Now, exception is the superclass to. Now, what happens? I have a catch with exception, but there is no exception rising statement in the try. Will it be compiled then? I have a catch with exception, but there is no exception rising statement in the try. Now, will it be compiled or not? Will it be compiled or not? We have a catch with exception, but there is no exception rising statement in the try. It will definitely compile. Just because the exception is a class which is superclass to both checked exception as well as unchecked exception. That rule that I have told is for purely checked exception. Let's consider like we have clone not supported exception, which is a pure checked exception. Definitely it is a pure checked exception. So, for this, if there is a catch with a pure checked exception and there is no corresponding exception rising statement, then it will be a compile time error. But exception and throwable. Exception and throwable. Okay? These two are not purely checked exceptions. These two classes are super classes to both checked exceptions as well as unchecked exceptions. So even we have catch with exception and throwable, the compiler will not expect the exception rising statement in the try. But if the catch contains a pure checked exception, a 100% checked exception, then only the compiler expects the corresponding exception rising statement in the try. The catch contains a pure checked exception, then only the compiler expects corresponding exception rising statement in the try. Now here it is a compile time error just because catch contains clone not supported exception, which is a pure checked exception, but the corresponding exception rising statement is not there in the try. There is no statement which rises clone not supported exception. So now it is a compile time error. Understood? For super exception classes, for exception or throwable, it will not give a compile time error. Okay? Just because they are not purely checked exceptions. Okay, these throwable and exception. These two classes are super classes for both checked as well as unchecked exceptions. The rule that I told is only for purely checked exceptions, not for super exception classes or unchecked exceptions. Understood? Now, can we have a try finally without catch? I have just tried finally, but I don't have catch. Is it possible? Exception is, but we don't know whether the exception object is raised or not. The exception is raised or not will be known only to the runtime environment. Am I right?
We can write without get, but if a exception is derived, then program properly terminated.
See, I'm not asking whether the program is terminated or not. I'm asking, can I keep try finally without catch? It's possible. It's possible to have try finally combination without catch if there is no checked exception rising statement in the try. It's possible to have a try finally combination without catch. It's possible to have a try finally combination without catch if there is no checked exception rising statement in the try. See, whether we are handling the exception or not, for unchecked exceptions it is up to the runtime environment. But the compiler will allow you a try finally. The runtime, the execution will be blocked if there is exception. It's a different case. But what I am asking is it possible to have try finally? Yes, the compiler will allow that. The compiler will allow try finally combination, but not if there is a checked exception rising statement in the try. If there is a checked exception rising statement in the try, definitely we should have a catch. Let's consider like if there is a checked exception rising statement in the try. Now, definitely we should have a catch. Otherwise, if we don't have a checked exception rising statement in the try, we can have just try and finally combination. We can have just try and finally combination if there is no checked exception rising statement in the try. Okay? Now what happens? What's the output? Before finally, and will it come to end? Before is executed, finally is executed, and it will not come to end just because here there is task exception, but it was not handled. Even it was not handled, definitely will come to finally. So before, finally, and the exception will be raised. Okay, so the execution will be blocked, and that's how it will be the try catch finally, how the try catch and finally will behave, and let's consider that. I am printing the value of I. So what would be the value of I printed at the end? Sorry, there is no reference variable. Why I is restricted to try?
So they are declared so registered to that block only.
Okay, let's clap for the example. Just please clap. Okay, it's a perfect answer. As we told in the first class itself, try is the executable block. Okay? And any variable declared in an executable block will become local to that executable block. So, if I declare a variable in try, that variable will become local to that try block. So, what I am doing is, I have a variable in try block. So, this variable which is declared inside try block will become local to this try block. A variable which is declared in try block will become local to the try block. Not even try, it might be catch or finally. If I declare some variable in a block, then that variable will become local to that block. The block might be the block might be method, constructor, initialization block, or even try block, or catch block, or finally. So, the variable which is declared in try should be used only within the boundaries of try. The variable which is declared in try should be used only within the boundaries of try. The variable which is declared in catch should be used only within the boundaries of catch. And the variable which is declared in finally should be used only within the boundaries of finally. But what I am doing is, I have declared a variable. This is declaration. Okay, just see here. This is declaration. Okay, I have declared a variable inside try and I am using inside catch and finally, which is a compile-time error. Okay. So I cannot use I at these places just because the variable I was declared in try and it can be used at maximum, it can be used within the boundaries of try. That's it. Okay, it cannot cross the boundaries of try just because even try is also a executable block. Now? Now what is the output? What is the value of I printed? What is the value of I printed at the end? 0. Why it is 0? Huh? See, that's what I told. The attribute, the local variable which is declared inside the executable block cannot be used outside the executable block. But did I declare I inside try? I'm just using I inside try, but doesn't mean that. That's why I told this is declaration. This is declaration. If I declare I inside try like this is declaration. Now I have declared I inside try. But now did I declare inside try? Is this declaration inside try? No. This is declaration is there inside the method. Now, if I declare a variable inside the method, it can be used throughout the method. There is no problem. Now even try is there inside the method. See, there is I and I is declared in the method. Then I can be used throughout the method, wherever it might be, inside the try block or wherever it might be. I can be used throughout the method. Now what is the output? What is the output? What is the value of I printed? Definitely it will be 30. We need not to check for any other cases. If there is finally means, at last it will come to finally. So, whatever the value assigned in finally, it will be the ultimate value. Whatever the block it executes try or not, or it executes catch or not, or wherever it go, finally it should come finally to the finally block. So, okay, if there is finally, we need not to check for anything. Directly we can have the value in finally, that is 30, and we can tell that 30 will be printed. Just because in any case, finally will be executed. So, if there is something in finally, we need not to check for anything. Directly we can tell that the value is printed is the value inside finally 30. Just because finally will be executed in any of the cases, whether the exception is raised or not, or the raised exception is handled or not. Now what's the value printed? What's the value printed? See, you need not to think for this much time. Just now I told. If there is finally, we need not to check for anything. Directly we can get the value in the finally, that is 30, and definitely 30 will be printed. Whether the exception is raised or not, or the raised exception is handled or not, in any case finally will be executed. If something is there in finally, then that is ultimate. That is the last one. So, what is the value in finally? 30. So 30 will be printed. There is no other question. 30 definitely will be printed in any case. Understand? Hmm. Now, what is the value printed? So, what is the output printed? What is the value of k? Compile them? Why it is a compile them error?
Object is not created.
See, whether the object is created or not is known only to the runtime environment. For compiler, it requires only data types. What is A1 of type A? Now, is A having an attribute with the name I? Yes. The compiler doesn't know what A1 contains. The compiler knows only what is the data type of A1 and is there any attribute I inside A1? Yes. But what A1 contains or to which object A1 is referring to is only known to the runtime environment. Now, what's the value printed? Before 0 n. Okay, is there any other answer? Is there any other answer? Now at the runtime, what is the value of A1? What's the value of A1? Null. Using null as a reference, if I try to access an attribute, what happens? It's an exception situation, right? If that exception situation is there in the executable block, then it is an exception. If the exception situation is there in the executable block, then exception object will be created. But if the exception situation is there in the class block, if the exceptional situation is there in the class block, then it will be a error. Okay? That error is, okay, initializer error. If there is an exceptional situation in the class block, not in a method or constructor or initialization block, if there is an exception in declaration of attributes, that means in the class, if there is an exception in the class block, that means while declaring the attributes, there is exception while declaring the attributes, then it will be a exception initializer error. It's not an exception, it is a error. Exceptions are possible. Exceptions are possible. Okay, exception objects are created only in executable blocks. Exception objects are created only in executable blocks. But here, if the exceptional scenario is there in the attributes, if the exceptional scenario is there in the attributes, then it will be a exception initializer error. It's an error. Now, so can we keep try catch like this? Then what happens? What's the value of I printed? What's the value of I printed here? Why main is not executed? See, doesn't mean that main should be located first in the class. It doesn't mean that main should be located first in the class. See, main can be the last block in the class. Where it might be, it will be recognized. Okay? No. This will be a compile time error just because try block and catch block are not independent executable blocks. Okay? This try block, catch block and finally block, these are not independent executable blocks. The only executable blocks possible in a class are either methods or constructors or initialization blocks. The only executable blocks possible in a class are either a method or a constructor or an initialization block. But try catch, this should not be placed in a class. Even if these are executable blocks, try catch and finally are executable blocks for sure. But try catch finally are not independent executable blocks. Try catch finally should be used either in a method or in a constructor or in an initialization block. Those are dependent executable blocks. Those are not independent. Those are dependent on other executable blocks. They should be placed in either a method or a constructor or an initialization block. The only executable blocks possible in a class are either a method or a constructor or an initialization block. Try catch finally, these are executable blocks, but these cannot be placed inside a class just because these are not independent. These should be used either in method or in constructor or inside initialization block. So in general, we should avoid these kind of assignments. Okay, at the place of declaration. We should avoid these kind of assignments at the place of declaration, which may lead to exceptions. Okay? And then no. No. Just please see the example and tell whether it is a possible scenario or not. If anything is required, then some modifications we can do. Compile them? Error. Why did they compile them error? Why? So I am returning 10. Cache becomes unreachable. Let's consider like there is a first statement, 16th statement. There is an exception in 16th statement. Let's consider like 16th statement rises class cast exception. Will it be unreachable? No. See, this thing we discuss clearly while discussing about the return statements. Okay, the compiler doesn't know which block is executed. The compiler doesn't know which block is executed at the runtime. But the compiler will think that each and every block is executed, and for each and every flow, the compiler will check for a return statement. Now, let's consider like try block is completely executed. Is there any return statement? Yes or no? Yes. If catch block is executed, is there any return statement? Yes or no? No. If the catch block is executed, do we have a return statement? Let's consider like there is a class cast exception here. Now there is a class cast exception here. Okay, now if there is an exception, now it will come to the catch. But from catch, from where it will return? Now is there any return statement in this scenario? No, right? But the compiler doesn't know whether a class cast exception will be raised or not. The compiler doesn't know whether the control comes to the try or whether the control comes to the catch or not. But the compiler will check. If the control comes to the end of the try, is there any return statement? If the control comes to the catch block, is there any return statement? So, the compiler will check for return statement block wise for all the possible cases. But the compiler doesn't know the control will come to the catch block or not. The compiler doesn't know whether the exception is raised or not, or the raised exception is handled or not. It will not be known to the compiler. The compiler will check block wise. If it comes to the end of the try, is there any return statement? If it comes to the end of the catch, is there any return statement? Now, if it comes to the end of the try, is there any return statement? Yes or no? Yes. If it comes to the end of the catch, is there any return statement? No. So it will be a compile time error. So the compiler will never check which code or which block is executed. The compiler will analyze that in such a way that if all the blocks are executed and all the blocks are having return statement or not. So if the control comes to the cache block, there is no return statement. So it is a compile time error. Now let's consider that. Now, will it be compiled successful? Just see, will it be compiled successful? Let's consider the control will reach end of the try. End of the try means there is no exception. Then if the control reaches end of the try, then it will return from here. Now let's consider like the control reaches the catch. If the control comes to catch, do we have any return statement? If the control comes to catch, do we have any return statement? Yes or no? No. If there is no return statement, will it give a compile time error? If the control comes to the catch, obviously it will come to the next statement. Understood? If the control is coming to the catch, means the exception is handled. If the exception is handled, means obviously it will come to the next statement. So if the control comes to the catch, definitely it will come to the 20-second statement. Understood? If the control comes to catch means exception is handled. If the exception is handled means the next executable statement after the exception, after the catch will be executed. Understood? Then if there is a return statement after the catch, then return statement inside catch is not mandatory. Just because if it executes the catch, exception is handled. If exception is handled, then the next executable statement will be executed. Understood? So this will not be a compile time error. Okay? Now unreachable code. Why it is unreachable code? Just because the control will either come to the end of the try or the catch. If it doesn't come to the end of the try means it will come to catch. If the control comes to catch, there is a return statement. If the control reaches end of the try, there is a return statement. Now when it will reach 20-second statement? Is there any possibility to reach 20-second statement? No. If there is no exception, definitely it will reach the end of the try. If there is exception, then it will reach the catch. Okay? If there is no exception, definitely it will reach end of the try and it will return from here. And if there is exception and it is handled, then it will reach 20th statement and it will return from here. But is there any scenario where 20-second statement is reached? No. So it is a unreachable statement. And unreachable statements are compile time errors in Java. Blind rule. As a blind rule, we can tell that if there is a return statement in try and all the catches, there is a return statement in try and all the catches, then there should not be any return statement after the catch blocks. If there is a return statement in try and all the catch blocks, then there should not be any return statement after the last catch. If there is a return statement in try as well as all the catch blocks, then there should not be any statement, not even return statement, there should not be any statement. If there is a return statement in try as well as all the catch blocks, then there should not be any statement after the exception handling mechanism. Now what happens? What happens? Just refine the things that I told just now and tell the answer. Definitely it will be a compile time error. Why does the compile time error means? The compiler will check for each and every individual block. If try is completely executed, there is a return statement. If the first catch is executed, there is a return statement. But if the control comes to second catch, is there any return statement? No. So it is a compile time error. Just because there is no return statement if the control comes to second catch. So missing return statement in the 25th statement. So it's 25th. Okay? Now. Compile time error. Why is the compile time error? Unreachable means at least in one scenario it should not be executed. Now, will it be a compile time error or not? It will not be a compile time error. Just because there is a possibility to reach this statement when the second catch is executed. When the second catch is executed, what happens? There is no return statement, so it will come to the next statement. So either try or any of the catches doesn't have return statement. If either try or any of the catches doesn't have return statement, then we can put statements after the exception handling mechanism. If there is no return statement, at least either in try or at least in one of the catches. If there is no return statement either in try or at least in one of the catch blocks, then there can be statements after the exception handling mechanism.
Sir, if we use in the first get block superclass of the exception, superclass exception, then all the exception is entered in the first get.
So it will be a compile time error, right? If we have super exception class in the catch, okay, and if it is first, then obviously the compiler will recognize that. If we have multiple exception classes, then it should be in the ascending order of the inheritance hierarchy. That we told in the previous class. Okay? Now what happens? Sorry, let me return 20 from here. Try has no return statement. Now will it reach the end of try? Will the control reach the end of try? Yes, that's perfect. Whether the control reaches to end of try or not will be verified only at the runtime environment. But for compiler, it will check if the control reaches end of the try, is there any return statement or not. Okay, the compiler will check only the possibilities. The compiler will never know whether it reaches to end of the try or first catch is executed or second catch is executed. But the compiler will check the possibilities. If the control reaches end of the try, is there any return statement? If the first catch is executed, is there any return statement? If the second catch is executed, is there any return statement? The compiler will think in that manner. The compiler doesn't know at the time of execution whether the control comes to the last statement or not. The compiler doesn't know that. But the compiler will verify all the possible cases. If the control comes to end of the try, is there any return statement? And if the control comes to first catch, is there any return statement? Now, if the control comes to end of the try, there is no return statement. So it will be a compile time error. Okay? This will be a compile time error just because the control comes to end of the try, there is no return statement. Okay? So this will be a compile time error. Then, what's the value printed? Hmm? 30 or 10? 30? Sure? See? The control here is a class exception, right? If it is a class exception, then the control comes here. Now, the control comes here means is the exception handle? Yes or no? The exception got handled. If the exception got handled, will it come to the test statement? If the exception got handled, will it come to the statement? No, just because whenever the return statement is triggered, definitely it will go back to the calling phase. So, from the hash block itself, it will return back to the calling phase. So, what is the value return? So, whenever the return statement is triggered, it will go back to the calling phase. So, the value returned is 30. Whenever a return statement is triggered, the control will go back to the calling place. Now, what happens? What is the value returned? 10, 20 or 30? Definitely the value returned will be 10. Just because here there is a class cast exception and it will come to the catch, and in the catch do we have any return statement? No. So directly the control will come to the next executable statement. What is the next executable statement? 10. So it will return 10. So the value returned is 10. Okay? So there is no return statement in try or in at least one catch. There is no return statement in try or at least in one catch. Okay, then there can be statements after the exception handling. Now, let's consider that. Now, what is the value written? Now, why can you come here? We have? Okay. What happens if we have two return statements? Which one? Which statement? We have 35 lines here. Which line will become unreachable? Why it is the compilation error if it comes to finally? Last? Yes. Obviously, the return statement should be the last executable statement. But it doesn't mean that the return statement in the cache should be the last executable statement. Anyhow, for a method, the return statement should be the last executable statement. Definitely. Okay? But that doesn't mean that the return statement in the cache is the last executable statement. Does it mean like that? Anyhow, the return statement should be the last executable statement. But that doesn't mean that the return statement in the cache is the last executable statement. Now here, what happens is, actually, the control should return from this statement. The control should return from this statement. Okay? Just because there is a return value. There is an exception here, just as exception, from this cache. Actually, the control should return from here. But before returning the control, this exception handling mechanism has a contract. What's the contract? Anyhow, at any case, it should execute finally. So, the control comes to finally. Okay? The control comes to finally, but finally also we have a return statement. In finally, there is a return statement. Then, the return value will override the existing return value. In finally, if there is a return statement, then the return value will override the existing return value. What is the existing return value? 5. What is the return value finally? 20. So, 20 will be returned. If there is a return statement in finally, then it will override the existing return value whatever it might be. So, the return value is 20. If there is a return statement, then it will override the existing return value. If there is a return statement in finally, then it will override the existing return value. So obviously 20 will be printed. Now, no, it's not the case. Finally is a special case. Just it will override the existing return value. Then what is the value returned? Which one is the last block? What? See, I'm not asking which block is executed or which block is not executed. What is the value printed in system.out.println at the age statement? Definitely 20. We need not to check anything. If there is a return statement in finally, definitely that value will be returned. At any case. Okay, the value returned is 20. If there is a return statement in finally, definitely that value will be returned.
How can we know the exception is handled?
How can we?
Know that the exception is handled by using the node and the value is overridden. So, at what
See, the exception will be handled. Okay, in the catch we print stack trace, right? See, in general, right now I have not kept print stack trace, but for any catch, as discussed in the yesterday's or previous classes, in catch we put in any catch we put print stack trace. What print stack trace will do? Just it will list out the exception related stack in the console. For any case we put this print stack trace, but for the purpose of simplicity I did not keep this. Okay, but in the previous examples we have discussed why print stack trace is used. For any case we should put print stack trace to know what is the exception which is raised. Okay, now this will be definitely a compile time. See, in any case it will come finally. Either exception is raised or not, or the raised exception is handled or not. In any case it will come to finally. In finally there is return statement means not any other statement is not possible after finally. In finally if there is return statement, is it possible to reach the next statement? Just because in any case finally will be executed. Either the exception is raised or not, or the raised exception is added or not. In any case finally is executed. So if there is a return statement in finally, return statement is not required in any blocks, try or catch or any blocks. That's the first thing. If the return statement is there in finally, then the return statement is not required in any blocks, try or catch or any blocks. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if there is a return statement in finally, then after finally there should not be even a single statement. The first thing is, if there is a return statement in finally, then the return statement is not required in any of the blocks. Just because whatever the block it will go, ultimately it reaches finally. So, if there is return statement in finally, we need not have return statement in try and catch. That's the first thing. Second thing, if we have a return statement in finally, then definitely at any cost it will reach finally. Whether the exception is right or not, or the right exception is handled or not, definitely it will come to finally. So, if there is any return statement in finally, after finally block, we should not have a single statement. We should not have even a single statement. Just because whatever the statement after finally, it will become unreachable if there is a return statement in finally. Whatever the statements after finally, whatever the statements might be, and whatever the number of statements might be, okay, just all the statements after finally will become unreachable if there is a return statement in finally. Just because everything was finally will be executed, and if there is a written statement finally, there should not be even a single statement after finally. If there is a written statement in finally, there should not be even a single statement after finally. So it is a compile time error. Just because we have a written statement in finally, if there is a written statement in finally, then the rest of the statements will become unreachable. Okay? This will be a compile time error. Blindly we can tell that if there is a written statement in finally, then it will override all the written statements in try or catches. And if there is a written statement in finally, there should not be even a single statement after the finally. Understood? This is how the written statements will be in exception handling mechanism. Okay? Understood? Now, what is the value written? What's the value written? 20, definitely. Just because if there is a written statement and finally we need not to check for anything, 20 will be written. That's it. Now, what's the value written? What's the value written? Compile time error. Why is the compile time error means? In the try there is a written statement. In the second catch there is a written statement, but in the first catch there is no written statement. Now what is the value written? What is the value written? 50 or 60? 60? See, for finally there is a contract that, okay, finally block will be executed. See, actually it should return 50. But what it will, before it returns 50, it has a contract that it should execute finally block. So, it execute finally block and it will return 50. But it doesn't have a contract that it should execute the last statement. It doesn't have a contract like that. Before returning from this method, it should return finally. It has a contract with finally, just because before for any situation, finally should be executed. But there is no rule that it should execute 60. It should come to this return schedule. From here itself actually it will return. But before returning 50, first it will come to finally and it execute finally and it will return. There is a return statement in finally, then only it will override. Otherwise, it will return. If there is a return statement in finally, then only the return value will be overridden. Otherwise, the return value will not be overridden. That's a clarification. Okay? Huh? If there is a class exception, it will come here. There is no return statement. Okay? Any other questions? So, if there is a return statement in finally, then only the return value is overridden. The rest of the other places cannot override the return values. The rest of the places cannot override the return values. That privilege is only for finally block. The rest of the statements cannot override the return values. That privilege is only for finally block. And one more thing is there is no limit for the number of catch blocks. We can have any number of catch blocks, but it should follow the ascending order of inheritance of exception classes. Okay? And there can be multiple try-catch blocks in a method like this. Let's consider like we can have try-catch, some exception, like this we can have multiple try-catch blocks. In the same method we can have multiple try-catch blocks, but in general we won't do like this. Okay, at maximum in general we have a single try-catch block in a method, but it's possible to have multiple try-catch combinations in a same method. It's possible to have multiple try-catch combinations within the same method. It's possible. Okay, and even it's possible to have nested try-catch. That means a try-catch inside try or a try-catch inside catch. This is possible. Or even a try-catch inside finally. Everything is possible. Now we have try-catch both in try as well as catch and even finally. Wherever we wish we can keep the exception handling mechanism. This nested try-catch is possible. The nested exception handling mechanism is possible. It's valid. Nested exception handling mechanism is a valid case. Like this we can have multiple try-catch blocks and we can have nested up to any levels. Okay? Yes. Let's stop for the day. And tomorrow we'll see the propagation of exceptions. Okay? And next class will be on Monday. Okay? Monday, same time.